So, Politico put out an article called Marianne Williamson's Abusive Treatment of 2020 Campaign Staff Revealed, and they exposed her. They showed that she was, at one point, called a tyrant, that she treated her staff members in a very inhumane manner. And some of the things discussed here are so graphic and disturbing that I wouldn't have a problem if people who are off put by stuff like that, kind of like a queasy stomach, um, turned the channel or clicked off the video. I completely understand. Because after you hear the things that this very scary spiritual advisor has done, you probably won't even want to hear her name after this. So let's go through this article. The best selling author Marianne Williamson has built a career preaching love and forgiveness. It is the cornerstone of her second Democratic campaign for president, which she launched on March 4th. But those who have worked with Williamson as she has moved into the political realm say her public persona is at odds with her private behavior. Interviews with 12 people who worked for Williamson during her 2020 presidential campaign paint a picture of a boss who can be verbally and emotionally abusive. Those interviewed say the best selling author and spiritual advisor subjected her employees to unpredictable, explosive episodes of anger. They said Williamson could be cruel and demeaning to her staff, and that her behavior went far beyond the typical stress of a grueling presidential cycle. It would be foaming, spitting, uncontrollable rage, said a former staffer who, like most people that spoke with Politico, was granted anonymity because of their concern about being sued for breaking non-disclosure agreements. It was traumatic, and the experience in the end was terrifying. Williamson would throw her phone at staffers. According to three of those former staffers, her outbursts could be so loud that two former aides recounted at least 4 occasions where hotel staff knocked on her door to check on the situation. In one instance, Williamson got so angry about the logistics of a campaign trip to South Carolina that she felt was poorly planned that she pounded a car door until her hands started to swell. According to 4 former staffers, ultimately she had to go to an urgent care facility, they said. All 12 former staffers interviewed recall instances where Williamson would scream at people until they started to cry. When presented with details of Politico's reporting, Paul Hodes, a former U.S. congressman who served as Williamson's 2020 New Hampshire state director, said such descriptions mirrored his own experience working with her. Those reports of Miss Williamson's behavior are consistent with my observations, consistent with contemporaneous discussions I had about her conduct with staff members, and entirely consistent with my own personal experience with her behavior on multiple occasions, he said. In an email to Politico, Williamson said such accusations of her behavior were slanderous and categorically untrue. Former staffers trying to score points with the political establishment by sparing me might be good for their careers, but the intention is to deflect attention from the important issues facing the American people, she said. This presidential campaign expects concentrated efforts to dismiss and denigrate us, but the amplification of outright lies should not occur. In the same email, Williamson denied ever throwing a phone at staffers, but she did acknowledge that she went to urgent care after getting upset and hitting her hand on a car door, but said a car door is not a person. I would never be physically hurtful to a person. She also acknowledged that there was an occasion when she raised her voice in a hotel room and someone came to see what was happening. I find it hard to believe that people in politics have never raised their voice before, she said. Former staffers interviewed noted that tough boss criticisms tend to unfairly be lobbied at female leaders, but they also stressed that Williamson's behavior was beyond the boundaries of acceptable regardless of her gender. Although Williamson has little shot at defeating President Joe Biden in the 2024 Democratic presidential primary, they love throwing that one in there. They said they were motivated to come forward now to warn people who were considering working on her campaign about her treatment of staff. Those former aides said Williamson's behavior was hard to predict. She berated staffers for seemingly inconsequential things, like if they booked a hotel room that had a walk-in shower and not a bathtub, they said. She would tell her staff to cancel an event only to change her mind the day later and accuse them of trying to undermine her campaign. She obsessed over the physical appearance of others and ridiculed staffers for being overweight, according to 4 former aides. Williamson said she never mocked anyone for their weight. She would get caught in these vicious emotional loops where she would yell and scream hysterically, said a second former staffer. This was day after day after day. It wasn't that she was having a bad day or moment, it was just boom, 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 and often for no legitimate reason. In her year long candidacy, Williamson burned through two campaign managers, multiple staff directors, field organizers, and volunteers. Some were let go, but others said they quit because of the campaign's culture. In a resignation email sent to Williamson on August 14, 2019, Robert Becker, the campaign's then Iowa State Director, wrote that Williamson's treatment of staff was belittling, abusive, dehumanizing, and unacceptable. According to a copied email exchange with Williamson obtained by Politico, Becker, who was a controversial hire due to a prior allegation that he forcibly kissed a subordinate while working on Senator Bernie Sanders' 2016 Democratic presidential campaign, added, "I cannot in good faith subject any future campaign hires to this kind of vitriol." For 30 years, I have had zero tolerance for bullying in the workplace, and that has to include the principal. Man, I'm against bullying in the workplace, but it's totally fine to try to force yourself on a subordinate. God, Becker is just... Williamson emailed back, "I did go out on a limb for you, but more importantly, I had no idea that you would have seen me that way. Hopefully I will learn from what you have said, and hopefully you will not say such things to others." Becker did not respond to Politico's multiple requests for comment. Politico authenticated the emails with a former Williamson staffer. Williamson feared that her staff would go behind her back and talk to reporters about her behavior, according to 6 former staff members who said she required campaign employees to sign non-disclosure agreements and made clear that they would be strictly enforced. At one point in 2019, she suggested monitoring staffers' phones, according to one of them, but never followed through with the idea. Williamson denied that she ever suggested doing such a thing. Hey, forget Watergate, this is Williamson Gate. The message was, don't expletive with me because I will make your life a living hell, so no one expletive with her. She said a third former staffer, campaigns often use NDAs to protect proprietary information from spilling out into the public, but former aides say Williamson's use of NDAs went beyond just her full-time campaign staff. Those aides said that Williamson's personal assistant traveled with NDAs readily available and would ask taxi drivers and other service industry workers to sign them if Williamson lost her temper in front of them. Williamson denied the charge. However, 2 former staffers said they witnessed this happen on separate occasions after Williamson started berating staff in cabs to and from fundraising and media events in New York. There was a period after the campaign ended where there was an intense trauma bonding, said a fourth former campaign aide. It was like, what the expletive did we just go through? Campaign staff had conversations among themselves about how to approach Williamson about seeking help for her behavior, but most said they thought it would be an uphill battle given Williamson's track record of skepticism surrounding mental health and antidepressants. Many said they felt like there was no way to talk to Williamson about such sensitive topics without opening themselves up to her verbal attacks. Her perspective on the pharmaceutical industry, those points of views informed her personal actions in not getting medication and help that she needed, said the second former aide. While Williamson's behavior during the 2020 campaign has not been previously been reported, it mirrors reporting from 30 years ago when Williamson's popularity as a spiritual guru was taking off among major Hollywood celebrities following the publication of her first book, A Return to Love. A 1992 People's Magazine story profiling Williamson said she had a temper, an unchecked ego, as well as a cruel, abrasive management style, and quoted a former associate who called Williamson a tyrant. A Los Angeles Times story published that same year reported that people who had worked with Williamson described her as having an explosive temper that erupts indiscriminately. Still, her behavior came as a shock to most for 2020 campaign staff, the majority of whom had backgrounds working in politics and only knew of Williamson through her best-selling books and public speaking events, encouraging people to harness the power of love and learning to forgive. Some people said they joined the campaign simply because they needed a job and Williamson was offering them one. Others said they thought there was room in the race for a dark horse candidate to push people, including Biden, on topics such as reparations. And some said that Williamson's books on compassion and forgiveness had helped them through their own struggles of divorce, addiction, and loss of family members. Instead, they walked away feeling emotionally tormented. It's cliche, but all I can say is, don't meet your heroes, said a fifth former staffer. Now listen, before I did this, I actually made an attempt at recording the same story being read by me, and then I got interrupted, so that's my second time. trying to do this. Now, really, what's at the heart of this article is another parallel. Now, when I covered Williamson's appearance on ABC, I said that they had nothing, which is why a lot of times when people ask her questions about her positions, it all comes down to how do you pay for it. Um, if anyone remembers, and I'm sure people do remember, when Sanders ran in 2016, and to an extent when he ran the second time as well, there was this narrative about Bernie Bros, and there were these toxic supporters of his. And, all candidates, have some people that like them that are not the nicest of people. But they really tried to push this thing of like, the people around him are just these disgusting, evil bastards. And what was crazy is that later on in the 2020 campaign, Warren, who had met with Sanders before they both ran for president or decided to run for president, like made their public announcements, she would come out and say, "Oh, Sanders told me in private that he didn't believe a woman could win the White House," and this is after Sanders campaigned like crazy for Hillary during the general election in 2016. So that we knew that was Warren being a snake. We knew that was her telling a lie. And ultimately, her reward was losing her own home state and then dropping out sometime afterward. So with Williamson, because they don't want to address what she actually discusses, her positions on issues, they're left with two options. They either completely ignore her, which they've been doing a pretty decent job of, I have to admit. She gets talked about a couple of times in passing on these networks, but for the most part, they've been doing a decent job of of doing the Williamson blackout, where they just don't say anything about her. Or when they do mention her, it's on frivolous, ridiculous, absolutely insane issues that have nothing to do with helping a single person. And I hate to, steal a phrase, but she said it right. The intention is to deflect attention from the important issues facing the American people. And the article had the nerve, the gall to mention that she went through 2 campaign staffers. Didn't Trump go through, 3 of them when he ran in 2016? In fact, Harris, I remember distinctively, she was going before her withdrawal in like late 2019. She was going to replace her campaign manager with someone else. So going through people over the course of what is a fairly lengthy campaign of at least a year, if not 2 years, and hers will be over a year if she lasts until they actually start voting in Iowa next year. Or excuse me, in South Carolina. I have to keep reminding myself. They tilted the stuff in favor of the moderates. It's just nuts that they try to take something normal, which is when someone runs for president, oftentimes they change staff. It takes place over a year or sometimes even 2 years, pretty much, to run. And they try to say, oh, people left her campaign because she was toxic. They had the nerve to quote Becker. This is a guy who is alleged to have forcibly tried to kiss a subordinate while he was working for Bernie. And Williamson, practicing what she preaches, says, hey, we should forgive this person. I'll give him another chance. Maybe this was a false allegation. After she gives him a chance to work for her, he, because no good deed goes unpunished, he turns on her and goes, I do not feel comfortable with the way that I have been treated. It's like, you are the last person who should be complaining about being uncomfortable. Look at what you did when you worked for Sanders. But yeah, what all this article does is just reaffirm that Williamson's positions are so ironclad that they can't even address what she actually is in favor of. This is an attempt to smear her. It's a bunch of, anonymous sources because nobody has to come out. And then the people that they quote aren't even credible themselves. It's almost like a joke in a sense. Like, oh, she has an ego. Yeah, I'm surprised that people who want to lead the free world don't have an ego. I've never heard of that before. like she was she yelled at her staffers, man, raised her voice too, and she hit the car door. I mean, that poor car, that vehicular abuse is something we don't tolerate in politics. You know, people have never done damage to vehicles and been expected to win a race before. That's. I love how the article still mentions like she very unlikely to win against. It's like, yeah, she's so unlikely and such a long shot from winning that we have to write long editorials about how abusive she is. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Because like I said, if someone is so non-relevant, you wouldn't be writing stories about them, right? So yeah, it's just a big smear piece. I tried to have some fun with it. Um, but don't take it too seriously. That just see it, if you want to be positive about this, as another example of their fearfulness of her, their attempt to not address actual things affecting people's lives, which unfortunately now print journalists are doing as well. Um, and really, it's all part of the same effort to just smear anyone they disagree with. Uh, it's kind of sad, but you know, at least we're seeing in real time that a lot of people aren't buying into it.